A deep dive into accessible notifications with Russ Weekly, AliCamp 2022. AliCamp would like to thank our gold sponsors Intopia, Salesforce and Telstra, and silver sponsors ANZ, Deloitte Digital and Coles.
G'day, my name's Russ Weekly, and we're going to take a deep dive into accessible notifications. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm doing this recording today. In my case, this is the Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. I also pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people who are attending this event. Let's start with the first question. What are notifications? Well, notifications are aspects of the user interface that bring something to the attention of users. They're an important part of almost all digital products. When they're designed well, notifications can help improve the user interface. But when they're poorly designed, notifications can be distracting, annoying, or even frustrating. What about the different types of notifications? Well, we're going to look at notifications that are grouped based on the level of attention that's required from users. The first level of notifications requires immediate attention and user action. This can include push notifications, growl notifications, modals, and system errors. The second level of notifications require attention from the user at specific times after some event. And these include site-wide banner alerts and error messages. The third level of notifications are designed to inform users of an event, but they don't require urgent attention. And these include warning messages, success messages, information messages, and toast pop-ups. The fourth level of notifications are directly related to user interaction on an element, and so they only require attention at that time. And an example would be a tooltip. And then there are notifications that require the lowest level of attention as they're purely discoverable. An example would be badge notifications. Now, this is just one way to classify the different types of notifications. You may have different names for them. You may even categorize them slightly differently. The bottom line, though, is there are lots of different types. They have different user needs, and some are more important than others. Now let's look at some general considerations when designing and building notifications. First of all, we need to consider what type of information is going to be communicated. Secondly, what is the urgency of that information? And then, are user actions needed? We also need to consider what actions will trigger it, where it will appear, how it will appear, and whether it's going to be time-based or dismissible. Let's now talk about people who depend on accessible notifications. The first group is people who may have some cognitive or learning disabilities. For these sort of people, they may be easily confused by unexpected behaviours or unclear error messaging. And the second group is people with partial or no sight. These people rely on notifications, instructions and error messages to understand the context and also what's going on the page. Now, this second group may include users of screen readers, refreshable braille devices, or even screen magnification software. Let's now look at some accessibility considerations. At the most fundamental level, all users need to know what's going on and to be able to get appropriate feedback during interactions. Error messages must provide clear directions on how to resolve the problems. One of the biggest challenges with notifications is deciding when to draw attention to something. If the information is shared too often or inappropriate times, the experience could be frustrating. However, if information is shared too little, then users may miss critical information. Now let's look at some accessibility considerations for designers. Does it need to be dismissible? Does it need to receive focus? And if so, where should focus go after it's dismissed? Does it use colour alone for meaning? Does it have sufficient colour contrast? And does it contain animations or flashing that can be turned off by the user? And what about some accessibility considerations for developers? Well, let's start with, does it need to have an accessible name? Does it need a role or live regions? Does it need to be announced to assistive technologies? And if so, what is an appropriate time? And then we need to look at the keyboard. Are keystrokes needed within it? Can all actions be undertaken using the keyboard alone? And does it need to trap some keystrokes? Now, ideally, designers and developers should collaborate to make key decisions around any types of notifications. Let's dive a bit deeper now, starting with toast notifications. Toast notifications are often used to inform users of some sort of action, normally a successful action. They often appear in the bottom of the viewport, animating upwards into view. They're often time-based, and so will only appear on screen for a short period of time. And they normally don't require any type of user interaction. And in reality, if user interaction is needed, it probably should be a different type of notification. What about toast notifications and accessibility? Well, let's assume you decide that it's important to let users know that something has been successfully completed. And you decide that a toast pop-up is the best solution, and the reason is it lets users know without interfering with their overall process. Any toast notification information needs to also be announced to assistive technologies. The announcement should be polite rather than interrupting the current process, just like for sighted users. We could use RLive Polite here, as this will announce the notification at the next graceful opportunity. Or we could use a role, such as role equals status. Now this role has an implicit RLive Polite and ARIA Atomic equals true. Now the ARIA Atomic attribute indicates whether assistive technologies are going to announce all or part of the changed region. The true attribute will announce the region as a whole when changes are detected. So this means that everything inside that container will be announced. Now there should be no need to send focus to the toast notification, as it shouldn't contain any important user interactions. The notification should appear in close proximity to the user's actions. This is especially important for ZoomText users or any screen magnification users, as they may have some sort of screen magnification in place. If the toast notification appears in a different area of the screen, these users may miss the notification entirely. What about push notifications? Push notifications are often used to inform users of something important. For this reason, they often need attention and user interaction. They can appear anywhere in the viewport. Now, as there's always at least one user action within them, they should not be time-based. So users must engage with the notification, even if just to dismiss it. What about push notifications and accessibility? Due to their importance, push notifications need to receive focus. Focus could either go to the notification container, and in this case the container has tab index equals -1, and this means the container will receive focus initially, but it won't after that initial time. But focus can also go to the main heading inside the container if preferred. So in this case, the H3 inside has tab index -1. Or it could go to the first focusable element inside the notification. And so in this case, focus would go to the button. As the push notification is going to receive focus, it's going to need an accessible name. Now this could be applied directly to the notification container using aria-label, or the heading inside could be used to give the overall container a name. Now this could be achieved by applying an ARIA label by to the overall container and a matching ID to the heading. Also, due to their importance, push notifications need to be announced immediately. Now we could use RLive Assertive here, as this will announce the notification immediately to assistive technologies. Or we could use a role, such as role equals alert. Now this has an implicit RLive Assertive and ARIA Atomic True. Now, the notification also needs to be accessible using keyboard only. Now this means you shouldn't have to use a mouse or a trackpad to do any interactions within the notification. If dismissed by the user, you need to decide the most intuitive place to send focus. Now ideally this would be their previous location, where they were before the interaction with a push notification. But that may not be possible, and so you may need to send users back to the main content area of the page. The bottom line is, you need to send them somewhere that is intuitive and helpful. Let's now do a bit of a dive into modals. Modals are designed to deliberately interrupt user flows in order to solve an immediate problem. And then, when the problem's been resolved or dismissed, users should be taken back to where they were before the interruption. Modals generally appear over the top of the page, and the content below is generally dimmed. There's always at least one user interaction associated with these notifications. And as with push notifications, users must engage with the notification, even if just to dismiss it. But what about modals and accessibility? There are some key decisions around where focus should be sent when the modal is triggered. Should focus go to the modal container or the heading or the first focusable item? The answer may depend on the content or the purpose of the modal. Keyboard activity should remain focused on the modal until at least one user interaction has taken place. And this means that while the modal is open, keyboard users should never be allowed to interact with the page below. So keystrokes such as Tab and Shift-Tab need to trap focus within the modal. Now there may be times when you want to allow these keystrokes to go outside the modal, but generally only to the browser's Chrome, such as the address bar, etc. They should never get to the page below. And just like push notifications, you need to decide the most intuitive place to send focus once the modal has been dismissed. Let's now look at form field error notifications. Each form field that has an error should be visually flagged to show that it's invalid. The flagging method should not use colour alone to signify that that form control is invalid. This is especially important for some visually impaired or colour deficient users. If there's an error message present, it should be positioned in close proximity to the field that's considered invalid. And the error message should be informative. It should provide information that's going to help users fill in that field correctly. And the error message must be programmatically associated with the invalid form field. This means that the error message is going to be announced along with a label when the form control is in focus. And this can be achieved by applying ARIA described by to the form control and a matching ID applied to the error message. And then the invalid form field should be set with ARIA invalid equals true. And this informs assistive technologies that the value entered does not conform to the format expected by the application. Let's now look at on-submit error notifications. There are two fundamental approaches to error notifications. The first approach involves validating and then notifying users of errors as focus leaves the individual form field, and this is often referred to as on-blur. The second approach involves validating and notifying users of errors as they attempt to submit the form, and this is often referred to as on-submit. In reality, forms that use on-blur still must use on-submit validation as well. And the reason is, users may not resolve individual form fields before attempting to submit the form. Imagine a situation where a screen reader user tries to submit a form and the form has two invalid fields. Even if those two fields are clearly identified, this user may not be aware of the problem. They may try to submit the form. And the worst thing that can happen in this situation is for focus to remain on the submit button. Now this screen reader user may assume that there's an issue and keep trying to submit the form. And that's not what we want. Ideally, we need to send focus somewhere that will help this user. Now, one option would be to send this user to the first invalid form field. And this method works, but it doesn't let the user know how many fields are invalid. They're going to have to work through the form and discover each error for themselves. Now, when there's more than one error, a preferred method might be to send the user to an error message that gets injected above the form. But how could we make this error message accessible? Well, the error message should have a heading inside it that lets users know that the form below has errors, and it could even let them know the number of errors. So in this case, it says, warning, the form below contains 2 errors. Focus should be sent to the heading inside the error message, and this can be done with tab index -1. And this means the heading is going to initially receive focus as soon as it's triggered, but will then remain out of tab index order afterwards. Now the error message should list all of the errors as links, and this means that users can jump to each error within the form below quickly and easily. Now the list of errors could be based on the label content or the error content, or a combination of both. It really doesn't matter as long as it's helpful to users. Now the key thing here is, this error message above the form could be useful to everyone, not just people who use assistive technologies. It lets all users know that the form has errors, hopefully the number of errors, and it gives them a quick method to navigate to each of those errors. So let's wrap up. You've probably gathered by now that notifications are complex. They need to be considered carefully, especially from an accessibility perspective. You need to consider so many things, like where notifications are going to appear. You need to consider if they're going to be time-based or dismissible. You need to determine if they can receive focus. And if they do, you need to consider keyboard access within the notification. But you also need to consider where focus is going to go when the users leave the notification. You also need to consider whether notifications are going to be announced to assistive technologies, and more importantly, when this should occur. And in some cases, you may even need to consider more complex things like the name and role of the notification so that it's meaningful to assistive technologies. The thing is though, if all these things are considered, notifications can be useful and helpful to all users. So that's it. Good luck in all your future notifications, and thanks for your time.
AliCamp 2022.